Hello, and welcome back to the most disturbing films ever made. Today we get to talk about probably the most controversial film ever made. Today we get to discuss 1980's Cannibal Holocaust, and as you'll grow to understand later in the video, this really is a very controversial and awful film. A quick warning before we get into the actual review, this movie contains real animal deaths and animal cruelty, and they are not cleanly or nice by any means. So if you're sensitive to that kind of subject matter, I definitely recommend skipping this movie because the animal deaths are extremely gruesome and brutal. Again, we'll probably cover that a little later in the video, but for now, let's just get right into the review. The film is split up into two different sections, I'll say. The first half of the film, we follow an anthropologist as he goes to the Amazon to look for a missing documentary film crew who was researching cannibal tribes in the area. The anthropologist flies out to the Amazon and is greeted by military personnel who have taken one of the tribespeople hostage. After this tribesperson is exchanged back to the tribe, we learn that there are two factions of cannibals that are actually warring with each other. After the military personnel and anthropologists actually save a group of the cannibals, they take him back to their village. Then in such a bizarre scene, the anthropologist, to gain their trust, goes into this river completely naked, and a bunch of the women from the tribe run in to join him and take him to the shrine where they actually murdered the film crew. And to retrieve the leftover film that the documentary crew had, he plays music out of a recorder, and I don't know, it's such a weird intro, but this is where we now get into the second part of the film, which is a lot more dark. So the anthropologist flies back to New York with the footage, and a TV station actually wants to broadcast it, but they have to review the footage beforehand. And this is where we get where most people consider the first found footage film to ever be made, which is actually kind of a cool piece of film history. We get introduced again to the documentary film crew, and we learn that they are just complete assholes, for lack of a better term. Like, there really isn't another word to describe them. They are just awful human beings. And this is where we get a lot of the animal cruelty and animal deaths in the film that I'll go over a little more in depth later. The film crew's tour guide is actually bitten by a venomous snake, and in an attempt to save his life, they try and amputate his leg. It's a pretty graphic scene, but only gets worse from here. The amputation does not go well, and their tour guide bleeds out and dies. Upon going deeper into the village, they encounter one of the cannibal tribes in a small group and actually fire a shot at one of them, wounding him so they can follow him back to their village. Once they arrive at the village, the entire crew just starts intimidating the tribe and herds them into this little hut that they light on fire just to make the documentary a little more exciting, I guess. The crew is just doing this because they want to stage a massacre and make their documentary more exciting, and at this point, I really don't care what happens to the film crew whatsoever. We cut back to New York where they're reviewing the footage, and the TV station still wants to air the footage. As a last-ditch effort to make them not, the anthropologist shows them the final unedited footage, and this is where we get really graphic. The final two reels of footage show the documentary film crew finding one of the cannibal tribeswomen. They start harassing her, and it escalates from there, and 3 of the 4 of them actually go ahead and... It should be noted that one of the documentary film crew is a woman who's dating a man that just this poor woman, and it's just awful. Later on, they encounter that exact same woman who has now been impaled through a spike and oh my gosh, it's a horrible thing to see. They even show this little pre-section before one of the guys talks about, oh, how horrible this is, where he's just sitting there grinning at this poor woman that's just been impaled, and it just leaves such a terrible feeling in you. The crew then claims that she was killed because of her loss of virginity that all three of them took together, which is just absolutely horrible. The group is then ambushed by the tribe and picked off one by one. The first guy is hit by a spear, and as all these people are coming and surrounding him, one of the crew members shoots him to make their own escape easier. They film as this guy is just absolutely ripped apart by the tribe. As they're running away as well, they eventually get cornered, and the girl is taken next. This girl, who is probably the most innocent out of the group, is captured, stripped completely naked, beaten, and then they decapitate her just, as the cherry on top. The final two men are eventually captured and murdered in a less, cinematic way, and that's where that footage ends. After the anthropologist shows them this footage, everyone agrees that the film should just be destroyed, and that's how this film ends. Now, I also want to talk about the controversy with this film because it's just as legendary as the film itself, if not more. So it says here that 10 days after its premiere in Milan, Cannibal Holocaust was confiscated under the orders of the local magistrate, and the director was charged with obscenity. Later on, a magazine actually published an article claiming that the deaths in the film were entirely real and that this should be categorized as a snuff film. Ironically, the director made all the actors sign contracts saying they wouldn't appear in public for the next year after the film was released. This only built around the idea that they were actually murdered, so while they were in court, the actors had to appear to prove that they were alive. Another part of the snuff film kind of controversy came from the woman that was impaled. It was so realistic that they claimed they really murdered this woman, these tribespeople did. They had to explain how they did this effect practically. Basically, what they did was sit the woman on a stump with a bicycle seat, and then she held another piece of wood in her mouth. That's how they got the effect. The murder charges were eventually dropped, but the obscenity charges he was actually found guilty of. Now, to get to the earlier point that I was talking about, the animal cruelty in this film is just horrendous. There are a total of 6 animal deaths, and I'm gonna list them off here. A coati mistaken for a muskrat in the film. I don't know if I pronounced that correct, but it's killed with a knife. A large turtle is decapitated, and its limbs, shell, and entrails are all removed. That's probably the most notorious death in the film. A tarantula killed with a machete. A boa constrictor also killed with a machete. A squirrel monkey decapitated with a machete, and lastly, a pig shot in the head with a .22 caliber rifle at point-blank range. Now, I just kind of want to touch on this. I don't agree with any sort of animal death in films. These are probably the most notorious ones, but there are so many other cases that I just don't think are necessary at all. Other films, such as Benny's Video, El Topo, and Caché, all contain real animal deaths in them. And I don't really care what artistic message you're trying to send, I just don't agree with that content being used in any sort of film. That's just my personal opinion though, and I stand by it. The last thing I'll talk about with this film is its crazy censorship. This film is censored everywhere. So the British Board of Film Censors, that had power to ban all films in the United Kingdom, tried to get Cannibal Holocaust banned, but it was actually released straight to video there, avoiding the possible banning of the film. However, the Director of Public Prosecutions compiled a list of 72 movies that they deemed the video nasties and were banned in the United Kingdom. Cannibal Holocaust being one of those films. And the United Kingdom is not the only country that this film is banned in. It's banned in so many other countries, but that's probably the most notable just because of the history of video nasties. Even to this day, it's kind of a hard film to come by, in all honesty. Less so in the United States, but I know in Europe it's hard to come by. But yeah, this film has had such an interesting history, and it's just a marvel that it's even a thing in existence, honestly. I've gotten a lot of requests to cover this film, and I definitely agree that it's probably one of the most disturbing films ever made, even to this day. But if you're going to seek it out, just be wary. There's a lot of awful things that are real in this film, and if you don't want to subject yourself to that, I don't blame you. But yeah, just be warned before looking up this film. And thank you again for joining me for the most disturbing films ever made. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time.